here's the story. Hey, everybody. Good show for this Thursday. We were saying we have a lot of big stories tonight. We're excited. So thank you for being here. Welcome to The Story. I'm Maggie Vespa. If you haven't heard, Dan is off this week, but fear not, everything else about what we do here remains the same. All the ways to contact us are at the bottom of your screen. I feel so cheesy doing this, but they're there. You can email the story at kgw.com. You can reach out on social media with that hashtag HeyDan. Send us your comments, your questions, the hottest of your takes. We want to hear it all because, as you'll see, your feedback drives this show. So with that said, let's dive right in, because you might think this, that when you delete a photo from your phone or a video, it's gone. That's it, right? Well, not really. And the FBI proved that by pulling up some old videos that a battleground man thought he had deleted. They show him and his son inside the U.S. Capitol during the insurrection on January 6th. And now both the father and son are facing federal charges. So the son, 37-year-old Jeremy Grace, there he is, was arrested yesterday. That comes 3 months after his father, Jeff Grace, was arrested in connection with the Capitol riot. So back in March, investigative reporter Kyle Aboshi spoke with the father in this duo, Jeff Grace. And during that interview, Jeff Grace admitted that he went into the Capitol rotunda, but he claimed his son did not.
And he was not arrested or charged.
He didn't go in the Capitol.
Did you take any photos or video when you were there?
Nope.
Shaking his head there, is pretty sure about it. So according to the FBI, that was not true. Videos recovered from Grace's cell phone show the father and son posing together inside the Capitol. And as you'll hear, the FBI says Grace tried his best to hide the evidence or just flat out get rid of it. So I sat down with Kyle earlier to walk through all of this. Okay, Kyle Aboshi joining me now. So Kyle, I mean, you interviewed the father in this father-son duo, basically, Jeff Grace. That was back in March. And now we have to start with kind of a blunt question because, I mean, it now appears, does it not, that he lied to you?
He did lie. We had an extensive interview back in March, sat down for more than an hour, actually. And I actually went back and looked at the transcript today. A couple things stood out. One, he said that his son didn't go into the Capitol. Well, we know that's not true based on the FBI affidavit where they have photos of he and his son inside the Capitol, in the rotunda.
The second part about this that, we were talking about this in our morning meeting, and it really interested all of us in the newsroom, is the technology and specifically how the FBI figured this out. So can you describe what we know about that at this point?
Right. And in a lot of these Capitol riot cases, the FBI is leaning on technology, photos and videos. In this case, a cell phone. Jeff Grace had taken some photos along with his son, and he thought he deleted them, actually. The FBI claims that it was able to go into his iPhone where he deleted it. They found those in the trash folder. And as many people know, it's not just a video, right? It's where that video was taken and when. It's also included in that data on your cell phone. Also, they've been looking at where the cell phone pinged, and they were able to isolate the location very near or inside the Capitol as a result of that technology.
All right. So obviously did not empty the trash, which is a lesson I guess we can take away from this bizarre story. Kyle Aboshi, thank you so much for the update. Fascinating stuff. All right, let's turn now to our big story tonight. It's about one of our favorite topics here on this show, you might have seen. Misinformation. We hate that it exists, but we love covering it. It's one thing when conspiracy theories and outright lies, by the way, are being spread by random, faceless accounts online, or frankly, that racist relative that you have to see at Thanksgiving but should probably mute on Facebook. That's one thing. It's another thing when our elected officials are the ones spreading the misinformation. Unfortunately, that's what's happening on the Clark County Council. The chair of that council is using debunked false claims about the COVID vaccine to try and make it harder for teenagers to get a shot. Here's Tim Gordon.
You have a 100% chance of surviving COVID-19.
All you have to do is look at what happened at Ridgefield High School to see that some people disagree about how to stop a deadly pandemic. Some here protested ongoing mask wearing by students, but the real target was a vaccination clinic at the school, organized by student body leaders and coordinated through Clark County Public Health.
Kids don't have the wherewithal to really think this through for themselves.
At the exact same time Wednesday, the Public Health Board was meeting, led by Clark County Council Chair Eileen Queering O'Brien. Among other things, O'Brien wants vaccination clinics at schools stopped, and she used misinformation to make her point, addressing Health Director Dr. Alan Melnick.
I really wish that you would consent to having parents give their permission to this experimental vaccine.
We're getting parental consent, and it's not Council Chair O'Brien. It's not an experimental vaccine. I just want to make sure it's gone. These vaccines have gone through extensive clinical trials. We are not experimenting on people.
These vaccines are some of the better vaccines that we have. They're highly effective.
I spoke to Dr. Melnick Thursday, as we often have over the past 15 months. I asked how he felt hearing inaccuracies the day before. He looked at the bright side.
It gives me an opportunity to provide the appropriate information.
Earlier in the meeting, O'Brien suggested the health board require adults to show ID to prove they're the guardian of kids getting vaccinated. She had support from county councilors Gary Medvigi and Karen Bowerman. All said they'd like to explore the legality of it. Melnick explained that showing ID wouldn't prove guardianship, and more importantly, that it would serve as a barrier to people getting vaccinated, especially immigrants and people of color.
My job is to get the right information out, and I'll continue to do that.
And Melnick added, despite a vocal minority,
most parents want their kids to be vaccinated, and most parents appreciated the fact that we had a site at the school site, and I would point out that, parents who want their kids to get vaccinated have rights too.
Tim Gordon, KGW News.
And our thanks to Tim there. So we should point out, by the way, we did reach out to County Chair O'Brien today to try and talk to her directly, but she hasn't responded yet. We'll let you know if and when we hear back. All right, let's change gears here and count some vaccines now. We're going to start in Washington today. More than 4.23 million people have gotten at least their first dose, and that works out to about 68% of the state's adult population. And then over in Oregon, more than 2.27 million people have gotten at least their first dose. That puts us at nearly 65%. We're getting so close of the state's adult population. Both states are waiting to hit 70% before they fully reopen. And by the way, to get us there in Oregon, you might have heard, we have a new vaccine lottery incentive, the chance to win $1 million or win scholarships for teens. But the thing is, some people are not being included in this drawing, particularly veterans or their families who got their shots through the VA. I talked to Pat Doris about that. All right, Pat Doris joining me now. So Pat, we just said some people will not be included as far as what we know right now. But when we say some, let's be clear, we're talking like tens of thousands of people.
Right. 28,000 people who got vaccinated through the Portland VA, and they had a great program there. It's just now all of a sudden they're trying to, get this stuff into the state, and it's not working. In fact, the VA has said we have no process to give those names to the state. And the state, through the governor's office, has said, well, we're going to figure out something. And we're going to do it by the 27th of June. But as of today, they've not figured that out.
Yeah, we would love to know how that's going to happen, but I'm sure you'll keep us posted. Okay. Second point, though, by the way, you pointed out the same issue exists with vaccines administered through at least some of the tribes in Oregon, right?
That's correct. And now some of the tribes got their vaccine directly from the federal government, some from the state government. So if they got it from the state government, then they reported all the names of all the people they vaccinated. So those people are all part of this lottery. And by the way, there's a lot of misunderstanding on this. The lottery is not just for new people. The COVID lottery is for anyone in Oregon who got a shot, except for the VA folks right at this moment. And if you got your shot through a tribe that got its vaccine from the federal government, same problem as with the VA. There's no mechanism, at least not at this moment, to allow them to report your name to the OHA so you can be part of the drawing.
Gotcha. They're working on it, but I'll just reiterate your point. For those of us who got shots through the state already before the lottery was announced, we are entered in the lottery. We've gotten a lot of questions about that, so I'm glad that we're clearing that up. One last thing that we wanted to ask you about. Today was supposed to be the last day for first doses at the Oregon Convention Center, that mass vaccination site. It's supposed to close later this summer, but you learned that changed. This is no longer the last day for first doses at the OCC.
Yeah, the state is so aggressive and getting so creative now at trying to get every last person they can to get a vaccine that they said, we've got all this Johnson & Johnson vaccine sitting around. What if instead of, saying no more first vaccinations at the convention center, what if we said, if you're bringing someone in to get their second shot, because that's now going to go on for a couple of weeks, you could get your first and only shot if you want, because we're going to have the vaccine here. It's going to be ready to go. Let's make this happen. And so that's the idea, is they will do that at some of the other mass vaccination sites too that are still open, and hope to pick up, several thousand people that it was just a convenience thing, or maybe it'll be a spur of the moment thing, and they'll get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. I should say at the convention center, that is not going to start until, I believe, June 2nd. So that's like next Wednesday.
Gotcha. Okay. But they're kind of changing the plan as they go to accommodate all these curveballs, basically. But Pat Doris, thank you so much for staying on top of it. We appreciate it.
That's my pleasure.
All right, let's pivot now to a viewer comment. Bill wrote in and said, "Hey, Dan, solution to the vaccine passport issue, use an honor system to allow businesses to be exempt from the policing responsibility. The state could then do random checks within those businesses and cite individuals that were not masked and did not have proof or could not provide proof of a vaccine." And then he landed the plane writing, "Businesses should not have to bear the additional burden of policing a state mandate at this time when they have suffered so much from COVID." Bill, we can tell you put a lot of thought into that. Thank you so much for writing in. Seriously. So here's the deal. The state has been asked before about the idea of businesses at least being able to opt out of this vaccine passport policy. And we learned yesterday that national business groups wrote to the Biden administration condemning Oregon's mandate. On top of that, conservative groups are threatening to sue the state if Governor Kate Brown doesn't drop that mandate. But all of that in mind, officials have said not only can businesses not opt out, they could actually be fined if they don't check your vaccine passport at the door. In fact, here's what an OSHA administrator told Oregon lawmakers last week.
The penalties would depend on a number of factors. If an employer was careless in their implementation of their policy to the level that we thought it rose to a violation, and we felt that there was exposure as a result of that, so that employees were potentially subject to COVID-19, then the penalty would be calculated using a matrix that takes into account the size of the business. In the penalties we've issued related to COVID-19 so far, that did not involve willful violations, many of those penalties have been calculated at $100 or $125 or $175, depending on the size and some of the other factors involved. But if an employer refused to comply or simply said, "I'm going to use the honor system, I don't care what the state says," well, the minimum penalty for a willful violation is $8,900.
So that administrator went on to clarify that fine would be per business, not per unmasked customer. If you look around the streets of Portland, it seems like homelessness has skyrocketed just based on the number of tents. But that might be a little misleading.
We don't agree with the premise that every tent equals another person.
And everyone's favorite game to play in the school computer lab is getting a revamp for Native American representation. But you can still die of dysentery when the story continues. Welcome back. I was just reading some of your tweets and emails throughout the show. A lot about the vaccine passport and the vaccine lottery and those being left out of the process. We're going to answer some of those at the end of the show. So keep them coming with the hashtag HeyDan or email the story at kgw.com. But for now, let's talk about our housing crisis and just how many people are actually sleeping on our streets more than a year into the pandemic. The last count said it was just over 2,000 people in Multnomah County. Conventional wisdom is that homelessness has gone up since then during the pandemic. And it's not just based on optics. Amid historic job losses due to COVID, economists predicted a 40 to 45% rise in homelessness nationwide. And locally, service providers have braced for a tidal wave of need. Now, all that being said, homelessness is a much broader, more complex issue than just those living on our streets. But we will start there because it is a big question that we get a lot. Are there more people on the streets here in the Portland metro area? Well, the blunt question is we can't know for sure, at least not yet, because the data is lagging, at least months behind, and you'll hear why in a minute. So for now, we're turning to Cascadia Behavioral Health Care. They have for years deployed outreach teams to help people on our streets find basic services and connect them to housing. And the woman who oversees that program is named Kim James. So I talked to her about this question. We have a lot of people writing in saying it's clear the housing crisis is worse than ever. I see more tents than I've ever seen. It just looks bigger. That's obvious. But you, having been out on the ground as much as you have, it sounds like you're not quite convinced that the numbers have gone up that much. And we don't have data, by the way, I should say, to back that up because the county's count was postponed a year. So what's your take on that?
So I think that those of us that are on the street, we recognize that there are more tents on the street. We don't agree with the premise that every tent equals another person. I could be that person with, again, my one tent and 3 other tents belong to me simply because that's my stuff. And so I think a person walking by will say, oh my gosh, look at all these tents. And then we turn around and say, right, but there's one person who owns these 3 tents in a cluster or these 5 tents in a cluster. It is, we equate it to if I was housed, this would be my various rooms of stuff. We have some people with full bedrooms, full couches, living room sets in their tents, in separate tents. You are seeing more people on the street simply because the places that people were able to go during the day, they're not available. People, especially say downtown, would be able to fold their stuff up, pack up, go somewhere during the day and set back up overnight. Right now, you're not seeing that because those places are not accessible. You're seeing people who are kind of dug in, which is what would not have happened historically, because we understood that, we can't stay here all day. But at this point, I think it's going to take us a little while and a lot of collaboration amongst agencies, including the city and the county, to ensure that we, pull this back together.
So that is James's theory, that homelessness hasn't risen as much as it appears. Instead, she thinks a lot of people acquired multiple tents because the city largely stopped clearing camps during the pandemic. That process, by the way, is now picking back up again. But as I said, we don't have current data on how many people are actually sleeping outside. And that's because Multnomah County was supposed to do their regular count of the homeless this past January, but they postponed it by a year due to concerns about COVID. So assuming that it happens this coming January, we will get the results, that new data, in the summer of 2022. It is worth noting that Marion County did do their count earlier this year, so we should get the results of that one this summer. Stay tuned. In the meantime, I do want to remind you all about our Hey Help campaign. This week, we are highlighting Cascadia Behavioral Health Care, and we're asking you to consider donating to help support the services they provide for our most vulnerable community members. So just open the camera on your phone like you're going to take a picture and point it at this QR code. It'll take you to a donation link. It makes it super easy. And by the way, we're calling this a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount, no matter how small. Each week, we're going to highlight a different cause. So if you know of a nonprofit or organization in need, let us know with that hashtag HeyDan. All right. Quick Quick, weird little question here. Who remembers playing the Oregon Trail game in school? Probably a lot of you. I definitely do. It's been around for decades. Well, now it's making a big, and we should say more inclusive, comeback. Here's Christelle Kumwe.
Giselle Halfmoon remembers playing the educational Oregon Trail video game in class about 30 years ago.
That was the big hype and the big reward for, being good, getting good grades, like the really big boxy monitor and the clunky keyboard.
She went to school on the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation.
There was definitely a connection and identifier, like these are Indian people, they're tribes attacking this wagon, and it's like, we're Indian people, we're tribal people.
The game has been around since the 70s and has been updated through the years. The company, Gameloft, redesigned the latest version to target original fans of the game and accurately represent Native Americans.
More respectful representation was really what we were going for.
Jared Trudgeon is the creative director at Gameloft Brisbane.
I'm a white Australian, I'm not an expert in this area, so it was important. It just was the right thing to do.
They reached out to 3 historians
who were Native American themselves, but also academics, so could bring both of those perspectives to the feedback that they gave us as we were developing the game. We worked very closely with them throughout the whole of development.
The new version of the Oregon Trail came out in April. It now has playable Native American characters, which wasn't doable before. Jared says Native Americans in the original game were either threats or tools.
We wanted to round that out and depict Native Americans as human beings. Fleshed out characters that you could have relationships with and have empathy with.
He says they also included Native American and Black historical figures like Biawachishish, who is a female Crow chief, and Moses Harris, a Black wagon train leader.
Downloading it, going into it, is really excited. And, pretty pleased to see the results and the representation that they attempted this time around.
While they've made many changes, one thing remains.
You've died of dysentery. That's an instant identifier for sure.
Players can still die of dysentery. I'm Christelle Kumwe for KGW News.
You gotta love ending it on an encouraging note. No, you can still die of dysentery. Don't worry, that's not going away. Christelle, that was a great story. Thank you. So many questions and comments coming in about a lot of our stories tonight. We're going to read some of them after the break when we finish the story. Welcome back. So much on the vaccine lottery and vaccine passports per usual. I'm going to run through a couple of these. So Rich_slaps on Twitter, lovely, wrote in and said, I'm a Portland resident, but I got my vaccine in Vancouver, Washington. Am I eligible for the lottery? Yes. Pat Doris has answered that question, so we can tell you it depends on where you live, not where you got the shot, at least when it comes to which state you're in. So you're good to go. Best of luck to you. All right, William wrote in and said, if the state counted the federal and tribal individuals who have been vaccinated, would we already be at 70%? And the answer to that is they are being counted in that 65% number that we showed you. That data is coming from the CDC. So the state's data is coming from the feds, who incorporate the states and the feds' shots. But great question. I love that critical thinking. Last one from Heather. I'm going to do one more. I just think this should be heard. She wrote, as a bar owner, my staff has enough stuff to handle at this point. It is unfair to have small business owners, especially in the service industry, check COVID cards. We aren't doing it. Period. And we had yesterday Tim Gordon on the air, and he said a lot of businesses, including major chains who have locations here in Oregon, are feeling the same way. So we're going to see how this plays out. And of course, we've got an entire vaccine team on that story, on all the vaccine stories. Keep your questions and your comments coming. And thank you so much for watching the story. The news with Laurel Porter is coming up next.